We can go ahead and get started now. My name is Amanda Pasick. I am Associate Director for Digital Marketing here at Selby Gardens. Thank you all for joining. Today we have a great presentation called Delicious History, a culinary exploration of our region. This is part one of a three-part series presented by Vice President for Regional History, John McCarthy. We're going to have opportunity at 2 points during this presentation for questions. If you want to go ahead and put those in the chat. And without further ado, I'll give it to John.
Thanks so much, Amanda. And thanks to those of you that have joined us today. We're going to do something a little different. And I'd also like a special thank you to Jennifer Romanecki, our president and CEO of Marie Selby Botanical Gardens, for encouraging me and helping that we produce these programs for our members and friends. So today's program draws from images from many different sources, and I always like to credit all of these sources because images really bring the programs to life. So we've got an artist that makes their Native American art available for anyone to use, and that's Merrill Clark. And so I've got some nice images there. University of Florida Institute in Food and Agricultural Sciences. I used a few of their images, and then images of some of the cookbooks that I tapped into. And then Manatee County has a wonderful collection of historical photographs. And so I've borrowed a few of their photographs as well. Want a special thank you to the archival volunteers that helped me to produce these programs and generate some of the materials that I use. Peg Pustiak, Marlene O'Neill, Heather Bell, and Susan Lowy. And this is not them in the photograph, but I thought it was a nice photograph of four women around a picnic table. All right, so Delicious History. This is, as Amanda said, a three-part series. And so we'll do another one in July and another one in August. And this program, I want to give a little introduction to why we're doing it and how it came up with the idea. And then we're going to get into some Florida staples, some things that I think most people would think of as old Florida meals. And then we're going to get into a section called Sweets and Treats. And I think you know what that is. That's the desserts and maybe maybe a little something extra. So the Delicious History, this was really inspired by a cookbook that was produced years ago at Spanish Point. And the cookbook gathered recipes, old Florida recipes and recipes from old Florida people, and assembled them together in a single place to make it possible for people to try some of these old recipes and enjoy that culinary experience of history. And so a month or so ago, I found one of these cookbooks on the shelf at Spanish Point, started looking through there and thought, you know what, this would make kind of an interesting program to talk about the old recipes and what the lifestyle was like back in the day and that sort of thing. I think that the cookbook wildly exceeded everyone's expectations and actually ended up winning a Tabasco Community Cookbook Award. It took first prize in the national contest in 1994. And so all the people that helped to put the cookbook together were very proud of that. And the cookbook came about because of a woman named Frances Newton. She was known by her friends as Fran. Fran had actually been born in Massachusetts, moved to St. Petersburg when she was 4 years old, spent a lot of time in Florida, fell in love with the military man, traveled the world, but she was always experimenting with recipes and developing cookbooks. And so Fran was doing cooking classes at Spanish Point and talked a bunch of other people into creating this cookbook. So you can see the committee there. She had a co-chair and Ann Meister, and then all these other folks contributed to making the cookbook a reality. And not only did they have to gather all the recipes, but they made every meal to make sure that the recipe worked. And some of them they made multiple times. So this was really a labor of love. I never met Fran Newton. I know a lot of her friends. Fran actually ended up in Nokomis in retirement, and yet she didn't retire. She kept working on cooking and cookbooks, as I said, and she lived to be 101 years old, so she had quite the life. These are some of the little advertisements for the cooking classes that Fran used to do at Spanish Point. And so there's one up here. It says Fran Newton's name is synonymous with the wildly popular historic Spanish Point cooking, then and now cookbook. So that was definitely her pride and joy. And she has a program here back in 1995 on citrus and loquats, another program in April on Florida picnic. And then here we have this wonderful photograph of one of the sessions where, as I understand it, she brought all the ingredients and had all the materials, but the people that participated in the class actually were hands-on and had a chance in putting these meals together. And Fran is in the far right of this particular photograph here, kind of at the head of the table as she's guiding people through the recipe of the day. So, so there's another cookbook. When I started thinking about the old Spanish Point then and now cookbook, I remembered that at home I had a 1914 Women's Club cookbook, and the Sarasota Women's Club created this Women's Club cookbook to raise money to build a clubhouse. And ultimately, Bertha Palmer, who of course owned the Spanish Point property, she contributed and loaned funds to the Women's Club so that they could buy the property over on Palm Avenue and Coconut, and then to build the building. And this was one of the ways that they were going to generate money to pay off that loan and move forward with the Women's Club. And I just have a Xerox copy of this old, over 100-year-old cookbook, but you can see the table of contents here. And I have to laugh when I saw this. Over half of the book are just desserts. It's a little bit lean on the entrees, and it is heavy on the desserts, the cakes, the pies, the preserves, all those sorts of things. There's a photograph of the ladies of the Women's Club here on the bottom of the screen, and that is from approximately the same time that the cookbook came out. The cookbook was actually published right here in Sarasota at the Sarasota Times newspaper. Rose Wilson was the editor and publisher of the paper, and so she was supporting the Women's Club in doing this. And she was actually written up in the other press around the state of Florida, congratulating her on the good work done at putting together the cookbook, because she kind of did it on a press that you wouldn't normally create a book on. And so folks were really proud of her. So this was another source of recipes that we're going to see today. And then I also discovered a number of early Florida newspapers would periodically publish recipes that truly, reflect the era. And one was the New Enterprise, which was a newspaper up in Madison, Florida. And then the other is the Florida Agriculturist, which was out of DeLand, Florida. And so within the program today, we've got recipes from the Spanish Point Then and Now cookbook that Fran Newton put together. We've got recipes from the Old Women's Club cookbook from 1914. And then we have recipes from the 1890s and like 1902, 1905 from these two newspapers. So that's the origin of the recipes. But, when you think about history and food, it's really striking if you think about, for instance, the Spanish Point campus. You had Native Americans harvesting seafood from the bay. So there was just such an abundance of food in Florida when the first people arrived. There was game in the woods. There was berries on the bushes. There was, fish and shellfish in the bay. And so I think these images give us a little sense of the health of the bay and the lifestyle that these people had in gathering up all this seafood, plenty of protein for a successful civilization. I think what's unique is how they took their food byproduct, the hard clam, the hard whelk shell, the scallop shell, all those shells that were just a byproduct of them eating the delicious seafood meat. And they stacked those up probably accidentally at first for a couple hundred years, and then realized that by stacking those shells up, they created a high home site, a place where they could have their huts safe from the high tides and the storm tides. Of course, they also got a better breeze and fewer mosquitoes because of that. They had a better view, kind of all the reasons why people like to live along the waterfront today. But this was basically produced from all of their eating. And so when you go to the historic Spanish Point campus, if you could kind of strip away all the vegetation, you would see those shell mounds like we see them in this artist's rendering, just representing thousands of years of meals and thousands of years of stacking up that seafood byproduct into a mound. And to really put this in perspective, the entire point at Spanish Point is man-made. from those meals. And in that case, for about 2,000 years over on that part of the property, following almost 3,000 years of eating meals and stacking it up over where the Guptill House is at the archaic shell ring around a small spring. And so the campus was essentially built through eating seafood and stacking up all those shells. So I think it's appropriate at Marie Selby Botanical Gardens, where we have such a jewel of a campus, that we connect our history with our food. And the pioneering Webb family who settled the Spanish Point and gave it that name in the first place back in the 1860s. Almost all the photographs that we have show people enjoying meals. In this particular case, this photograph, our guests at the Webb's Winter Resort, it's probably back around 1890s, maybe right after the turn of the century. We're actually located here on the northern end of Casey Key, that at that time severely overlapped the southern end of Siesta Key, which is what we see in the background of this image. And we see Little Sarasota Pass, which is now what most people would call the Turtle Beach boat ramp, the Turtle Beach Lagoon. But here we have visitors from all over the eastern seaboard coming here down to Florida in the winter season to enjoy the beaches and boating and hunting and fishing and all those things. And here we have a picnic out there on the beach, kind of being overseen by John Webb, who's standing on the left with the captain's hat and proud of his resort there in Florida and how people used to come down and enjoy it. But food was a very big part of that experience. And then this is a wonderful photograph that we have from the Guptill House. This is the Guptill House front porch. And these are all young people from the community. Frank and Lizzie Guptill were well known for inviting the youth of the community into their home. And so here you have this great meal being prepared out on the porch. And the next time you go to Spanish Point, kind of picture this big meal. And if you stand on the porch today, you can still see that red cedar tree that's in the background. It's a little bit larger because this photo is probably from about 1905 or so. But anyway, food's always been a big part of the Spanish Point history. This is a nice photograph showing Bertha Palmer seated at the table out at her cattle ranch, Meadow Sweet Pastures, out on the Mayaca River. So she had a little camp out there very close to where the entrance to the park is today. And they would bring out tables and chairs, as you see here, and linens and all the food. And they would have wonderful picnics out at Meadow Sweet Pastures on the Mayaca River. So again, Bertha Palmer, who acquired the Spanish Point property in 1910 and 11 and developed all of her gardens in 1912 and then lived there until 1918, and her family continued the tradition. She also really had a focus on the culinary delights of the area. And I thought I would throw in this photograph, which is a fairly common photograph to see in like an old Sarasota history book. This photograph was taken down at Uncle Ben Stickney's place, which was on the south end of what they called at the time Little Sarasota Key. Today we call it Siesta Key, just south of the Stickney Point Bridge that's named for Uncle Ben. And these are prominent folks from Sarasota and other folks from Sarasota. Almost every Sunday afternoon, people would get in their boats and go on down to Stickney's place, and they'd have a big picnic. And then as the evening came on, they would get back in their boats, try to get back up to Sarasota. Sometimes they made it. Sometimes the tide was too low, and they'd spend the night on the sandbar, and they'd get back into Sarasota Monday morning. But this was a big tradition. And just in looking at the photographs, on the far left in this one is Carrie Spencer Abbey. She's the Sarasota's postmistress, and she served that duty, I think, over 30 years. The fourth woman from the left is Ethel Wood. Her family was very prominent here in the 1890s and early part of the century, 1900s. And the house that she grew up in is managed by the Historical Society. It's the Luke Wood House, and it is the second oldest building in Sarasota, with White Cottage at Spanish Point being the third oldest. And then next to Ethel, so Ethel has the little black bow tie and the white blouse. And then next to her, the gentleman in the back, that's Cornelia Wilson, who was the editor and publisher of the Sarasota Times newspaper. And so he passed away in 1910. So we know this photograph is earlier than that. And then next to him, kind of in the back, with the tight-waisted black skirt and the white blouse, is his wife, Rose Wilson, who took over publishing the newspaper when he passed away in 1910 and ran it all the way up through the 1920s, is also believed to be the first woman to ever vote in Sarasota, and was the woman who published the Women's Club cookbook that I talked about earlier. The woman next to her, Charlotte Farnback, she ended up marrying Benjamin McCall, who owned like the whole north end of what's now Siesta Key. And then the gentleman over on the right-hand side with the black hat and the black bow tie, that's Thomas Yarbrough. He was a superintendent of schools. So a lot of folks would come out to the picnics at Uncle Ben Stickney's, and you can see they've got coffee, they've got iced tea, they've got all their things set out on the table, ready to enjoy a nice meal. So I thought I would kind of wrap up this first section and kick off the next section with one of Fran's favorite recipes, because Fran loves strawberries. So let's start with a little salad. So here's how this is going to work, folks. I'm going to give you the ingredients, and then I'm going to tell you how to make it. But I'm not going to demonstrate making it, and we're not going to be able to eat it because we're on Zoom. But anyway, I thought this was a delightful little salad, and it's got strawberries and papaya and on a bed of spinach. So let's get into it. The only ingredients you need a pound of spinach. You need to clean it up nice, remove the little ribs, tear it up a little bit, and slice it so it's easy to eat. And then 8 large papaya slices. You can get that out of one papaya, and 1 pint of hulled strawberries. And that just means that the little stem and the green top has been taken off, and you cut the strawberries in half. Well, then you have to make a little special dressing. So you got a tablespoon of sugar, you got a 1/4 cup of lime juice, you got 2 tablespoons of wine vinegar, you got 1 egg yolk, 6 tablespoons of vegetable oil, and 12 tablespoons of Grand Marnier. So you beat the egg yolk slightly in a medium-sized bowl. You add the sugar, and you can use a little more if you want a sweeter dressing. And Fran liked the sweet, so she probably added a little more. And your lime juice, your vinegar, and slowly beat in that oil. Now you take your Grand Marnier, which is like a cognac with orange bitters and sugar added. So you can do it that way too. And divide the spinach leeks among 4 chilled plates. So this is making a meal for 4. Arrange your strawberries and papaya on the spinach in an artistic way, and then drizzle your dressing over that. And then I like the emphasis on the large grind of black pepper. So you're taking this really sweet meal with the papaya and the strawberries, and you're adding that coarse black pepper to it. And you're grinding it on there, and now you've got your little salads. It's a tasty salad. It's a colorful salad. It's kind of a light salad, but what a great way to start a meal. And just to give you a little of the history of these photographs, down below is a papaya grove. Papayas were quite plentiful in Florida. Papayas are a great plant to have in your yard because the papain in the papaya is a great sting killer. So if you get bit by a bee or a wasp, or you get hit by a stingray when you're out in the water, you can put a little of that papaya on there and it'll help to kill that sting. So papayas are always good to have around. And then I love that photo on the top. These young people, this is actually probably from the 1960s in Plant City, and they're just picking strawberries right out of the field and just eating those strawberries just as fast as they can pick them. So, of course, Florida is known for citrus. It's known for strawberries. They got the Strawberry Festival up in Plant City. So strawberries was where I kind of wanted to get started today. And again, it was one of Fran Newton's favorites. So we'll do that for Fran. Now, let's get into the old Florida staples. And I don't think there's anything more old Florida than swamp cabbage. Now, I had the opportunity as a fairly young man to enjoy some swamp cabbage. I used to be invited to the Rotary Club's Pioneer Picnic, which was all the old timers in Sarasota would meet once a year out at Robart Sports Arena. And the Blackburn family and other local families would prepare all the food. And it was always, it was always some sort of hog. It was always some sort of smoked mullet, but they always had the swamp cabbage. And this particular recipe that we're going to look at for this one is actually from the Blackburn family, who for so many years made the swamp cabbage for every Pioneer Picnic, all sorts of other get-togethers of the old timers in Sarasota. And anyway, it comes from the sable palm, which is our state tree. a tree that isn't a tree at all. Of course, it's a palm. But at any rate, here's a little quote about it from a gentleman who visited the Webb's Winter Resort back in the 1880s and wrote about it in 1890. And he says, this particular cabbage, as the crackers call it, is really delicious in flavor and highly nutritious. It is white and brittle like celery, but much richer in taste. The people here boil it for the table when it assumes more the character and flavor of asparagus. So let's take a look at the cabbage palm is one of the most useful plants in Florida. So the Seminole Indians made their homes out of the palm fronds, the Chickees. And so on the upper left, we've got a little Chickee village down in the Everglades and this postcard from the 1940s. And if you look real hard, you can see a Coca-Cola cooler peeking out from the Chickee on the far right-hand side. The early pioneers, look at the photo down on the left. That's a photo of Sarasota's bayfront with a little fisherman's shack, all made out of the palm fronds of the cabbage palm. And then those of you that saw the program that I did earlier this year on the packing house might remember this amazing palm thatched Seminole Indian inspired packing house down on the Caloosahatchee River in the upper portion. And then in the 1930s, when the Civilian Conservation Corps built out Myakka River State Park in the area where the Bertha Palmer's sons had donated that old Meadow Sweet Pastures, their mother's cattle ranch. They donated that to the state as a state park. The Civilian Conservation Corps built these log cabins out of cabbage palms back in the 1930s. So these are now 90 years old. They're holding up quite well. And cabbage palm is a very useful plant. But of course, today we're talking about the food. And most people look at that big cabbage palm and they say, how am I going to get up there and get that heart of that palm out of there to make my swamp cabbage? Well, you don't use a full-size tree. In fact, it wouldn't even be good to eat. So what you do look for is a smallish cabbage palm, a young cabbage palm. And if where the bud splits, where the fronds are coming out is about eye level, maybe even a little bit lower, that's a good palm to cut into. So on the left-hand side, you can see this gentleman. He's got his axe, and he is cutting away the boot jacks and the other fronds down below, and he is getting into the heart of it. And then you can see here on the right, he has axed that enough that he's been able to pull that heart of palm out of that little start there. And now it's time to prep it. So here's how you do your preparation. As we've seen, you harvest the heart from a smallish cabbage palm. You cut off all the side layers. They just peel off. They kind of fall off in your hand. And you only eat the pieces that can be broken off really crisply, like they snap. And so you snap it all. You see, here's an image. You see these ladies, they are cutting it across the grain. And so they're making all these little circular pieces. And this is all literally just falling apart and snapping apart for them. So they know they've got the good part of the heart right there. Soak it in cold water overnight. And if you're not sure if you're doing this right, the best thing to do is to taste it as you go along. Because if it tastes bitter, you've got the wrong part. It does not want to taste bitter, and you don't want to eat it if it's bitter when it's raw. Anyway, the ingredients and the way this recipe goes, 2 palm hearts. So they're going to make quite a bit of it here. You could either harvest a cabbage palm from someone's property that you had permission to harvest it from, or you can buy heart of palm in the store in a can. And you need a 1/4 pound of salt pork, diced up fine. You need a 1/4 to 1/2 can of evaporated milk or cream, 1 teaspoon of sugar, and some salt and pepper. And what you want to do first is get probably your iron pan on the campfire, and you want to fry that diced pork until it's brown. And then you want to drain those palm hearts from all the moisture that you've soaked it all night long in, or at least for several hours. Add that to the salt pork and pour in a nice fresh 1/2 cup of water. Now you're going to just stir this and keep an eye on it like this gentleman is doing in the photo. And you're going to do that for about 30 minutes. And then the hearts will go tender, and you'll know that because you're sampling it as you go. And then you're going to add your salt, your pepper, your sugar, your milk. You're going to cook that all together for another 5 minutes or so, and then it's good to go. When I worked for a couple of years out at the T. Mabry Carlton Jr. Memorial Reserve, which is a 25,000 acre nature preserve out east of Venice. There was a gentleman out there that was involved in the hog management, which meant hog removal from the site because the hogs do a lot of damage to the native vegetation. And for lunch, he would just pull up somewhere. He would cut his palm out. He'd get a little fire going. He would get all his stuff going. And, in just a couple minutes, he would have some swamp cabbage to eat for what he called dinner. I called it lunch. He called it dinner. Anyway, I'll never forget watching him do this so fast and him sharing it with me and me actually seeing the whole process from start to finish. So, anyway, swamp cabbage is something that really kept a lot of people alive in Florida. No doubt the Native Americans knew all about it. They probably ate it as well. But that would be a real common food. Now, I found this one. This is one of Fran Newton's recipes, and it's in the cookbook. And this one, swamp cabbage fritters. So this, you get the same swamp cabbage the same way, but you're going to do a little extra to it. Of course, you need 3 eggs. You need a 3/4 of a cup of self-rising flour. You need a 1/4 cup of onions or scallions, 2 ounces of beer. I guess you have to drink the rest of the beer as you're cooking it, and oil for deep frying. So all you do here is you drain that cabbage. So you've chopped it up really, really fine. You've chopped it up really, really fine. You've drained it. You've added the eggs. Then you add the diced onions. Then you stir in the flour and the beer. And then you just shape it with your hands into whatever shape you want. Sometimes people do round, sometimes they do flat. Really doesn't matter how you do it. And then fry that in your deep fat until it's golden brown. Now you're going to see this golden brown come up time and time again with these old Florida recipes because a lot of the recipes were fried foods, and that golden brown told you it was time to eat. And then drain it out on the paper towels or on a cloth or something like that, so it's not greasy. And so this is just a different way to eat the swamp cabbage. Instead of it being like a vegetable, it's more like a fritter. Now, another old Florida staple is smoked mullet. And in the Spanish Point cookbook, there's a recipe in there from Pat Ball. And Pat Ball was on the board down at Spanish Point. Now he's a trustee for Marie Selby Botanical Gardens. But Pat is a multi-generation Floridian, and so he knows a little bit about smoked mullet. But before we talk about smoking the mullet and eating it, let's talk about the mullet itself, because I think it's hard for people to think about what things were like, 100 years ago, 150 years ago in Sarasota, when the bay would literally be filled with mullet. And when they were running, in schools, here's a quote from Charles Webb. This is John Webb's grandson. And he's saying, the mullet in the spawning season were a solid school in the bay, which is 2 miles long and 1 mile wide. They filled the bay by the millions. Now, you might look at something like this and say, well, that's a nostalgic look at the past. And yeah, there was a lot of fish out there, and he's kind of exaggerating. But you see these same almost exact words time and time again written by people that visited the Sarasota area. And I remember one account where they talk about all the fish coming in Big Pass and the fish being just filled throughout the bay. And it was like that for like 2 or 3 days. And just like almost like you could walk on the backs of the fish. So mullet were very common back then, not as common today. Like most things, times have changed. But there's a little bit of preparation. You've got to catch your fish. And in this particular recipe, Pat's suggesting that the best time to catch them is in the fall. And you want to catch them with a cast net, which is really one of two ways to catch mullet. People say you can't catch mullet on a hook, but actually, an old time Floridian taught me how to do it one day. And it's more labor intensive. You got to take oatmeal, put it in a ball, put it on the hook, get the mullet to work on that, and then kind of snag it. But most people catch mullet with a cast net. And you see the gentleman with the cast net here throwing it in alongside this dock. Throwing a cast net is an art form, and I'd say a dying art, but a lot of people use a cast net today to catch bait fish, and then they'll go out and catch some bigger fish. But when you catch it, you want to break the neck right away. You don't want to let those fish sit around. You want to break them right away. Then you want to clean them and be prepared to smoke them as soon as you can. You don't want them sitting around, even on the ice. You want the fresh fish. You want to prepare your grill with charcoal, and you want to add some hardwood. And the longer explanation that's in the recipe book says, look, you don't have to look too far for some hardwood. Just get some old dead branches off your oak tree in your yard and use that. So anyway, the ingredients are pretty basic. You got mullet, you got barbecue sauce, you got lemon juice, hot sauce, and salt and pepper. So let's take a look at this. So what you want to do is split the fish right down the middle. Some people leave the backbone in place. Some people cut the backbone out. But in any case, once you split it, you've got those two fillets and you've left the skin and the scales on. Now you want to wash them really good, just with clean water, and add your salt and pepper. And then baste it with your favorite barbecue sauce. And if you like the hot sauce, add in more hot sauce to your barbecue sauce. And then squeeze on your lemon juice. Put those fillets on the grill like you see here in the photo down below. And you can do this just in, you don't really need a smoker. This recipe was kind of designed just to do it on a cooker. And then you put them on the wire part of the grill, put the lid down, but not all the way. You want some of the smoke to be able to come on out so that your fire can keep going. Smoke it for about 40 minutes to an hour. Keep checking on it to make sure you don't overcook it. And then the ones in the center is going to cook up a little faster than the ones around the edge. So you're going to want to maybe mix those up a little bit, or just let those ones around the edge stay on there a little bit longer and cook it until it's golden brown and real tasty. Well, some people do taste it and make sure it's all good to go. Um, I've spent a lot of time in Inglewood, over the years, and have a lot of friends in Inglewood. And Inglewood's kind of famous for its smoked mullet. And if there's one person that's most famous for smoked mullet in Inglewood, it's a guy named Don Platt. And Don Platt's family had come down from Wisconsin back in the 1880s and settled Inglewood and set up an apiary and produced honey for decades. Anyway, Don would make this smoked mullet, and then he would stack it up in brown paper grocery bags. And you didn't have to refrigerate it. You could set it there for a week. It was good to go. It was completely cured. But he didn't cook it in like 40 minutes to an hour. He smoked it for hours. And Don provided the smoked mullet for all the big old time events in Inglewood, all the get-togethers, all the family get-togethers, the Chamber of Commerce meetings. And the Chamber of Commerce actually has a celebration every year called Smoked Mullet Lunch. And every time I'm invited to go, I always remember Don Platt's smoked mullet because it was the ultimate smoked mullet. Well, and deer. So when we come to meat, deer was really the most common meat that was available for the earliest of the pioneers. And once people started growing up cattle, then they had beef. And of course, you could go out and hunt hogs in the woods too. But deer seemed to be the preferred meat on most tables back in Pioneer, Florida. This particular recipe comes out of that Madison New Enterprise newspaper up in North Florida from 1904. So that's an old time recipe for you. And then this photograph, this hunting party from Sarasota, Florida. This is a postcard from about 1916. And you see several deer, you see some turkeys, you see the little hunting dogs down there. And these are all residents of the Bee Ridge community. And back then, of course, deer were everywhere. And so if you wanted some venison, you just went out with your rifle, your shotgun, and you brought it back home. So being 1904, this recipe is a little more casual. There are several good methods of cooking this delicious meat, but boiling and roasting are the most popular. Is a good plan to marinate the venison steaks before broiling them. And for this purpose, the following is recommended. So it can be a little gamey. And so by marinating it, you're making it more tender. You're also bringing in a little more flavor. So this 1904 recipe says stir into a tablespoonful of salad oil, some salt, some white pepper, and very little grated nutmeg. Roll that venison well in this before placing it in the broiler. And then after partial broiling, rub the steaks with butter and return to the fire until they're done. And then to serve, you want to place on very hot platter and add the seasoning and a little more butter. And then you melt a teaspoon of currant jelly and pour over the venison just before serving. Well, it was really interesting because when I found this recipe, I then looked at some of the other editions of the newspaper, and I found that after this was published, somebody wrote in and said, well, you don't need to do that currant jelly. And somebody else wrote in and said, well, you definitely have to do the currant jelly. It is not right unless you have the currant jelly. So this went on for a couple of weeks of people debating whether you needed the currant jelly or not. And I think the currant jelly won. All right, folks. So I thought I'd throw in something exotic that was certainly an old Florida uh, uh, delicacy, I guess you'd say, the rattlesnake. And one of the reasons why rattlesnake and not other snakes is because rattlesnakes were generally seen as a hazard to your homestead or your farm. Not that rattlesnakes are particularly aggressive, and they're certainly not looking to bite a human, but around your animals, it's not good. And if you have livestock and you've got things like that, you really don't want to lose a lot of that to the rattlesnakes. You also, if you have children, you really don't want them encountering the rattlesnakes. So, rattlesnake became something that if you found one, you tried to kill it. And if you've killed it, you're going to eat it. And I've included this little quote here that some of you might already be reading on the screen because one of my volunteers down at Spanish Point said, John, you got to include that little story about out at the original Homestead house. And so Emily Graves was John Webb's sister, and she had come down with the family from Utica, New York in the 1860s. And one day they heard her screaming in the dining room. Now, this is in the old Homestead house. It doesn't exist anymore. This was just beyond Bertha Palmer's sunken garden in Pergola, where the high part of the mound is there. And the men rushed in and they found her standing on the dining room table because under the table was an enormous rattlesnake. So they took care of that snake and they ate that snake. There's another story of Will Webb, I believe, found a double-fanged rattlesnake. So this was a rattlesnake with 4 fangs. And of course, for those of you that aren't really familiar with a eastern diamondback rattlesnake, because that's what this is, the name comes from the rattle on the tail, which you can clearly see in this little artwork here. And the rattle gets longer with age. And so when they would kill a rattlesnake, they'd always count the little parts of the tail there. Well, it had, 10 little parts on there. Again, the rattle is used to caution you that the snake is getting ready to strike. So if you hear the rattle, you want to back off from whatever you're doing. But anyway, here's some other photographs. This one on the right-hand side is from the 1930s. I think this is one of those Civilian Conservation Corps camps. And you can see this is really a beautiful reptile. The Eastern Diamondback Rattler, you can see where it gets its name. It is a beautiful snake with its pattern coloration there. And then over on the far left, you see this gentleman. He's got quite a large one there. And the woman on the lower left, you see, they would always skin the rattlesnake. People always wanted to preserve, and they would do a lot of taxidermy of the rattlesnake skins. And you see this woman had a hat fashioned out of a rattlesnake, that she is wearing a rattlesnake hat. Now, and then the photograph in the middle, out in Arcadia, there was a place where they actually processed rattlesnake and they sold it as a canned meat back in the 1930s and 1940s. So, and in fact, yeah, that was quite the operation out there in Arcadia at the time. So the ingredients are pretty simple. You need a rattlesnake. You need a cup of sour orange juice. You need 6 to 8 peppercorns. You need about a half teaspoon of nutmeg and a cup of flour, and then some salt and pepper. You'll start to see a pattern with these Florida recipes after a while, that a lot of them are the same ingredients, just used for a different type of meal. So you skin the snake and remove the internals, and then cut it into 2-inch pieces. Now, what this means is 2-inch pieces, the full width of the snake. Now, this is one of the other reasons why rattlesnake was such a popular thing to eat, because a rattlesnake can be huge and you get a lot of meat out of a rattlesnake. It's not like a little black racer or something like that where you'd be chewing on the bones and get a little bit of meat. There's a lot of meat on a rattlesnake. So you want to cut that into little 2-inch pieces with the bone in, and then you place the snake pieces in the marinade of orange juice, peppercorns, and the nutmeg for 3 hours. Let that marinade and get all those juices flowing. Then you drain it and wipe it dry. Roll the meat in the flour and the salt and the pepper. Now you fry it in the hot grease until golden brown. So you got some fried rattlesnake. Notice I have an addition up here in the upper right, which is the cure for snake bite. So you take equal parts of onion, tobacco, and salt, you make a little poultice and apply that to the bite. I figured if you were going to be out there hunting for a rattlesnake, you should have the cure for the snake bite. Now, of course, in modern times, you go to the hospital, they give you a serum, which is made from the rattlesnake, the venom, and hopefully you get better from that. But in the old days, they didn't have that opportunity, so this is what they did. And I was going to end it with the rattlesnake on the entrees, but then I decided to throw in one more meal, and this one's key lime grouper. And so a different kind of fish, but plentiful in the area. And so all you need is some grouper fillets cut into serving size pieces, 1 key lime sliced up, ready to go, a beaten egg and some breadcrumbs, a stick of butter, half pound of spinach chopped, a quarter pound of mushrooms chopped up, and a half cup grated Parmesan cheese. So we're going to dip the fish into the beaten egg and the breadcrumbs. We're going to let that fish stand for a while we saute the lime in a half of the butter. And then we're going to remove the lime and add the fish, cooking it on medium high until brown. Then we're going to turn the fish once, add the remainder of the butter, cover the fish with the spinach, mushrooms, and cheese. That's sounding pretty good, isn't it? Now you're going to cover the pan, turn the heat down to low, cook it for 8 to 10 minutes, depending on the thickness of the fillets. Remove from the pan, stir the drippings, and pour them over each portion. So this has got just a little bit of a key lime twist to it. And so that makes just a little bit different of a meal there out of the grouper. All right. So do we have any questions, Amanda, on on those first two sections of our presentation?
Yes, we do. Where can someone find the cookbooks?
Well, that's a real good question. If you're a volunteer at Marie Selby Botanical Gardens, come on down to Spanish Point, and we're going to have a couple of them on the shelf that you could borrow, and then you could make some recipes and then bring it on back for others too. I think they're also in some of the local libraries, and occasionally you'll see one for sale up on eBay. Then you could buy the whole cookbook. But we only have a few of them left because it was a big seller back when it first came out.
Can you catch a rattlesnake to eat?
Well, you can't. It is illegal to hunt and catch a rattlesnake these days. Rattlesnakes, as you can imagine, especially when they started doing all the canning, we're almost going to become another endangered species. So you cannot go out and catch one, but you can still buy cans of it, just like I showed you that you could buy back in the 30s and 40s. So if you want to cook rattlesnake, you go online, order up some rattlesnake in a can, and you can use the menu for that. Yeah.
Perfect. And then just one more question. Do you have a recipe for alligator meat?
Oh, I do. And we're going to share the alligator recipe in a future program. So stay tuned for that. I've deliberately saved a lot of good stuff for the next two programs. And so we're going to cover all the bases, but we're going to take three programs to do it.
All right, thank you.
All right, are we ready to roll? Okay, now we're going to do a little sweets and treats. And this is going to wrap up today's presentation. We have to start with original key lime pie. When people think of Florida, they think oranges, they think alligators, they think key lime pie. And this particular recipe is from Becky Kosh, and this is from the Spanish Point Cooking Then and Now cookbook. And a little picture of the finished pie down there on the left, and a nice image here of a woman picking key limes back in the 1940s. That's quite a nice outfit to be out picking limes off the tree. This is an old time recipe. This kind of precedes the availability of canned condensed milk. So you need 3 eggs separated. You need a quarter cup of key lime juice. And so that can be quite a few key limes because they're small. So you want to go ahead and get you quite a few key limes to make that quarter cup. 3 tablespoons of hot water, half a cup of sugar, plus another half cup that you'll use later, quarter teaspoon of salt, 9-inch pie crust, and some cream that you whip up because there was no whipped cream back then. It was cream that you whipped. And you just beat those egg yolks lightly in the double boiler, add your lime juice, your water, half of that cup of sugar and the salt. Place the top on that double boiler. But every now and then you want to keep stirring it while cooking it until you know it's good and thick. And then you want to beat your egg whites until stiff and adding the remaining sugar gradually in there. Fold into that lime mixture, pour into the pie shell, and bake it 350 degrees until delicately brown. Now, back in the old days, you didn't have 350 degrees on your oven. You had a wood-fired oven that was hot all the time, and you slid that pie in there, and you knew when it was going to be ready. And then you top it with that whipped cream. And so that makes a delicious pie that Florida is famous for key limes. And then I thought, well, that assumed that you already had the pie crust. Most key limes are made in a graham cracker crust. So let's take a look at this one. You need a 1.5 cups of graham cracker crumbs, quarter cup of sugar, half a teaspoon of cinnamon, and a half a cup of melted butter. Combine the graham cracker crumbs, the sugar, and the cinnamon in the bowl. Pour in that melted butter, stir it up to combine it, press it into the pie pan, and then bake it until it's golden brown. Now it's ready for your key lime ingredients. But I wanted to include mulberry pie because the other day I was out on the campus And I saw quite a few mulberry trees kind of bouncing back from the storms last year. And we've got mulberries back behind Mary's Chapel and mulberry trees over by the Guptill House. And most people don't think I think of mulberry as a Florida tree, but Florida's got plenty of mulberry trees. And so I figured this was a little bit of a unique pie recipe. And oh, by the way, the photograph on the lower left, that's the pie safe in the Guptill kitchen. And so the next time you're over at the Guptill House, check out the pie safe. This was just a cabinet with screening so that you could allow your pies to cool, but without getting any flies or any other kind of bugs on them down here in Florida. So a lot of the young people come in, they've never heard of a pie safe before. And so this is a great educational tool in terms of how people did things back in the day. So in this particular case, again, about a 9-inch pastry crust, 4 cups of stemmed mulberries. And that might be a little challenge finding that many of them, but if you got a really nice tree, you probably can. Half cup of sugar, 2 tablespoons of lemon or lime juice, and a 1/4 cup of cornstarch mixed with a half cup of water. So put those nice mulberries in the pan with the sugar and the lemon juice, add your cornstarch mixture, cook it until the mixture thickens up nice, pour it back into the shell and slide it back into that wood burning stove for about 30 minutes and then pull it out and allow it to cool in that pie safe there. And then I thought, well, what if you don't want a graham cracker crust? Because that really only works for the key lime. Here's one called citrus pie crust. And it's 1 2/3 cups of all purpose flour, a half teaspoon of cinnamon, half a cup of cold salted butter, 1/4 cup of lard, 1 teaspoon of salt, 5 tablespoons of fresh squeezed orange juice. That's where it's getting the citrus from, right? So combine the flour and salt in a bowl, cut in the butter and the lard until the mixture kind of resembles coarse crumbs. It's starting to kind of coalesce, hold together. Slowly add the cold orange juice, mixing it until the dough just comes together, not to put too much in there, and then chill that dough before rolling it out or putting it in your pan for the baking. So those are 2 pie crust options that you have. Well, I thought we should have something to drink with our meal. And so elderberry wine is what came to mind. Floridians made wine out of lots of stuff. The little advertisement, the little label over on the left-hand side is from Venice, Florida. And that's Frank Heigl, one of the early pioneers down there. And he made all sorts of different potions and concoctions and wines and things like that out of the plants that were so common here. In this particular case, he didn't make an elderberry wine. I put the orange wine in there, but just to kind of give you a sense that people down here in Florida, not having access to alcohol in other ways, would make it themselves. And so this is elderberries on the right-hand side. And in the middle, what you have is the elderberry blossom, which is what you actually make the wine from. So all you need here is a half gallon of the flour clusters. So you would cut those clusters off before they form the berries, 10 cups of sugar, 3 gallons of lukewarm water, and 1 cake of yeast. You mix all those ingredients and put it into a 3-gallon container. You let it sit there for 10 days. Then you put a pound of raisins into each of 3 1-gallon jars. Now you strain your wine into each jar and cap it real tight. Store that in a cool place for several months, and you got your elderberry wine. So again, elderberry growing all over South Florida, and something that the old timers would do. Well, I wanted to do a little sea grape something, so I picked the sea grape jelly. Sea grapes are all around us here in the Sarasota area, out on the Gulf Beach, along the bay, and people's yards. And most people don't pay any attention to the grapes themselves. But if you can put together 5 cups of sea grape, and then a 1/4 cup of lime juice, 6 cups of sugar, and a package of some sort of pectin. Shore Gel is a brand name, but any one of the pectins that helps to gel up your recipe. And to prepare the juice itself, you it says cover the berries. It's the flowers with water and cook until the skins are soft. I guess that's another way to do it. Mash with a potato masher and pour into a jelly bag and let drip. And then you squeeze it out of that bag to extract the remaining juice. Put the juice in the Sure Gel in a heavy pot and bring it to a boil. Add your sugar slowly bring it to a boil again for 1 minute, stir constantly, then skim off the foam and pour it into sterilized glasses and seal them up. So now you got your sea grape jelly. You don't see this a lot anymore. There aren't a lot of people that know how to do this, but that's a real Florida treat. So I think this is our last recipe today because this whole idea of doing a summer series of delicious history was inspired by Fran Newton, who used to do the lessons, the cooking demonstrations down at Spanish Point, and who kind of was the brainchild behind the cookbook. I wanted to pick another one of her favorite foods, but from a different source. So this is strawberry shortcake. And this one also is from the Madison New Enterprise. This one's from August of 1903. And so strawberries, again, real popular in Florida. So you need to 2 cupfuls of pastry, add 4 level teaspoons of baking powder and a half teaspoon of salt. Then rub into this with the tips of your fingers 4 level teaspoons of butter. Then add 1 egg beaten and 1 cup of milk. Now spread the dough in a greased pan and bake in a quick oven 15 minutes. That quick oven's your wood burning stove. It's all hot and ready to go. Split apart with a hot knife. And by that, they mean take with the cake that you've made and split it across, so you got a top and a bottom now. Spread butter on each part. Crush your strawberries and add plenty of sugar to them and put them on that first layer. Then put the layers together. Cover the top with cream that you've whipped up and more whole berries, and decorate it with the whipped cream using a pastry bag. So that makes you a fancy strawberry shortcake. So we've covered a lot of ground today in terms of old Florida meals. We've done strawberry salad. We've done swamp cabbage and swamp cabbage fritters, smoked mullet, venison steaks, rattlesnake, key lime grouper, original key lime pie, mulberry pie, sea grape jelly, and strawberry shortcake, in addition to our elderberry wine. So I hope you enjoyed the program today and you've got some ideas for some home cooking with Florida ingredients. And next month, we're going to do Delicious History Part 2. We're going to do some Seminole Indian specialties, go way back in time. We're going to do some Cuban influence specialties, and then we're going to do another sweets and treats to wrap it up. So I hope you have an opportunity to join us next month. If you would like to tell your friends about this program, they can find the program up on the Marie Selby Botanical Gardens YouTube channel, and they can enjoy it as well. So I would encourage you to think about one of these recipes you'd like to make. And look for one of those cookbooks, and or maybe just go on the YouTube and you can see my recipes right on the screen there. You can freeze frame it, do a screenshot, and then you'll have your recipe. So enjoy, and thank you for joining us today, and looking forward to seeing y'all again next month for some more delicious history.
All right. Thanks, John. I think we might need to get you your own cooking show.
All right.
Um, where are the mulberry trees at historic Spanish Point campus?
Yeah. So there's a couple over behind the Mary's Chapel. It is a heart-shaped leaf. It's very like a yellow-green color. It's an understory tree. I mean, so it's kind of growing underneath the live oaks and above some of the other things. And then I saw a couple smaller ones over behind the Guptill House the other day, and you can find them in other places on the campus. It is if you just go online and kind of look it up and see the shape of the leaf, it's very distinctive. But it's one of the trees in the coastal forests that don't get a lot of attention. We hear about the oaks and the cedars and the hickories and the cabbage palms, but the mulberries are almost always in that mix.
Cool. Um, did Pioneer Web family grow limes at historic Spanish Point?
Yes, they did. They grew limes, they grew lemons, they grew, of course, the oranges that they grew. And the key lime is particularly interesting because the key lime was introduced to the Florida Keys reputedly in the late 1890s, early 1900s by a gentleman named Frank Turenne. And these limes were very hardy and delicious, and people really loved them. And so this is why they're called key limes from growing up around the Florida Keys. But yeah, the Webb's had limes. And one of the things that made lime growing so popular in Florida was after the hard freezes of the middle 1890s, because there was two very hard freezes, 1894 and 1895. The limes were the only thing that survived in some of the central Florida places. So more and more people started growing limes. Plus, there was a ready market with the northern cities to buy more limes. So it was a lucrative thing to grow and sell.
All right. And I think we only have one more question. What about sea grape wine?
What about sea grape wine? Well, I've got two more programs to go. So I couldn't put all the best recipes in the first one. I've got to save some recipes for the next two. So we're going to get to sea grape wine, which I had the privilege of having here in Sarasota almost 40 years ago. And we're going to talk more about that next time, I think. So with that, that's wrapping up our questions. I think, Amanda, we've wrapped up our program for the day of Delicious
Yeah.
History.
Thanks everyone for joining. And like John said, this will be on our YouTube channel probably later on this afternoon. Thank you. Have a great day.